Hello and welcome to In Focus, brought to you from the Up North Media Center. I'm your host, Kimberli Bindschatel, here with my co-host, Anthony Weber. Today we're going to talk about the return of the superhero in popular culture. And we have two guests with us. Andrew Rust, he is a lifelong comic book fan, and Mike Akerly, who is the co-owner of Top Comics over on 8th Street here in Traverse City. Thank you both for coming.
Thanks for having us.
With us. So the return of the superhero, I'm going to admit right off that I am not knowledgeable at all about really superheroes, comics. This is going to be a really interesting conversation from my perspective because I know nothing. But I am interested in mythology, and I see how perhaps the superheroes and their storylines in that are kind of maybe more a contemporary, modern form of mythology. And I'm just wondering, Andrew, if you could start and tell me, am I even accurate at all, and is there a resurgence of popularity with these superheroes and that? I know that you've been interested in them all along, but in the mainstream, and do you think that's why, and kind of just get us started?
I would completely agree with that. I mean, you take Thor, for instance. He's a Norse god, and the plot behind that essentially is that we here on Earth, or as they refer to it in Marvel mythology, Midgard is all the Norse mythology is based off of these essentially aliens, and they're an alien race that have come, and Thor is actually the self-proclaimed protector of our realm and whatnot. And then, I mean, if you look at the Flash, I mean, think about what Greek and Roman god he represents. What is it?
Mercury, I believe.
Yeah.
Hermes. Yep.
And Hermes, and Aquaman, he's the king of the sea, and you have a lesser-known Marvel character, Namor, or the Submariner, who's been around since the 30s. He's one of the original superheroes, and they're both based off of Neptune and Poseidon and such. You know.
When comics first started becoming popular, or maybe when they first started back in the late 30s, early 40s, did they start as a purposeful retelling of mythology, or did they start with a different kind of contemporary creation of a superhero of some sort? And Mike, maybe I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, I think that was just the brainchild of two guys that, that's what they wanted to see. It was, Superman was much more of a wholesome character as needed at the time. I think if you were to threw that story in now, and actually Grant Morrison just did a story where if we were to see Superman right now, most people would be more scared of him than be like, oh, here's our savior. A lot of people are like, oh, this guy's way too powerful. We need to control this. I mean, he could take everything over. There would be a lot less trust. Where back in the day, it's a really great take on the character. And that almost gets more biblical too. I mean, you start talking about Jesus Christ and stuff like that. I mean, if we saw someone that said that they were Jesus Christ today, I hope they don't get to. But I think a lot of people would be skeptical or scared, or
be a different kind of reaction.
Be a different reaction, and I think that really happened with Superman.
Is Superman kind of, to me, what little I know about him is kind of the embodiment of an altruistic. I mean, he's almost like Robin Hood, right? Doesn't he kind of save people from harm at his own peril, kind of thing? So, what would be scary about him in our current culture if he
just this power, the power that he has? That, there's so much mistrust, when it comes to certain things like that today. Whereas, like I said back then, it was him saving cats out of trees and him doing everything wholesome that you can think of.
Right.
And he was, and that's what we needed at the time. And I think we need it again. And I would love to get back to the roots of Superman as that character instead of the one we're fearful of, or the one that's being portrayed darker in the movies. I think they're trying to make him more humanistic, where he isn't a human. He's an alien that came here, and he has a great moral code. And I think that'd be great to get back to that Superman instead of the dark one we've been seeing. So.
Well, yeah, I was going to say the latest movie is all about the fear of Superman's power.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at it that way too, I'm sorry, I'm taking over the whole conversation, but he was raised human, you know, and if you look at it in that light, he's going to have human flaws then. Even though he's all powerful, he's being raised with the flaws that we have already. So it makes sense for him to make mistakes as he's turning into Superman. So I understand where Zack Snyder was going with the movies. I just think that there's so many people that have such a high regard for Superman that we don't want to see that part of it.
Well, is this, I mean, it's an art, and is it a reflection of our society, or do we create art to try to change our society? So you're saying if Superman's been this darker, more fearful character, it feels like you're saying that that's a reflection of what people are thinking or feeling, as opposed to, sounds like you want him to be more ethical, or, you know, those kinds of things. How do we, can we drive that? Can we create new characters, put them out there, but what if nobody responds to them? Right?
Yeah.
So how does this, there must be some ebb and flow to the popularity of these characters, or do they evolve?
I think they do evolve, and I think it comes down to the application of the hero. Like, the thing that really attracts me to that genre of comic books in general, because, you know, first and foremost, there are many different comic books, and, you know, back before there were superheroes, you had Western comic books, and, you know, or the retelling of the Jungle Book, and, you know, whatnot. But you know, I think the superhero, yes, it's had the stigma of being childish and whatnot, and there are reasons for that, actually, and political reasons for that. So,
Like what?
the Comic Code Authority. The Comic Code Authority was instituted in 1954, and what it was is a response to some Senate hearings on comic books themselves, because there was a gentleman, Frederick Werthams, I believe is how you pronounce his name, but he put out a book called The Seduction of the Innocent, and he was essentially he was a German-American psychologist or psychiatrist, and he was trying very heavily to persecute comics. A lot of it was, at that time, there were a lot of horror comics, like Tales from the Crypt type stuff, and
Because he thought they were influencing children.
yes, he felt it was the big factor in juvenile delinquency, and, you know, completely demonized the art form, and
Right.
that's the thing, he wasn't looking at it as an art form, and so as a result of these Senate hearings, instead of having the comic industry at the time, instead of having the government come in and regulate them, they wanted to regulate themselves, and so they formed what was known as the Comic Code Authority. And it's a lot like the MPAA and the, what is that, the American Library Association and stuff like that. And so they implemented things to where you couldn't use like words like horror or terror in the title of your comics, and you couldn't show this and you couldn't show that. You couldn't discuss drug abuse or drugs in general. Sex, of course, you know, in America, it was completely sanitized and downplayed and everything.
Right. Interesting.
And he accused Batman and Robin of being a gay couple, and, because Wonder Woman was strong and independent, that she was a lesbian, and the comics had bondage undertones because, you know, she had, you know, these bracelets and a headband, and used a rope to tie up the bad guys and all that stuff, and you know, and that's
Because
pretty,
you should use a gun, Dad.
yeah, exactly.
America, use a gun.
Yeah.
So do you think their concerns about the influence of comics were legitimate? And maybe I'm not phrasing that properly. Was that a time when the impact of comics on youth, adolescents, whoever, was significant enough that there was reason to believe that comics are really shaping a new generation, or was that a lot of hype?
Well, I believe, like with any art form or any kind of medium, or medium rather, it does shape the future generation of creators and, you know, young minds and whatnot. I feel that it was in a positive manner because, you know, these heroes, you know, were created by, you know, everyday people like you and me. You know, you said yourself you're a writer, you know, and so they're the embodiment of the ideal of being a better person, you know, and, you know, they had the polar opposite, their arch nemesis and whatnot, which is, you know, the embodiment of, you know, true evil. And it's the constant, it's the age-old battle between good and evil.
So would you say that, it sounds like that's the definition of a superhero, because I was going to ask that, you know, what's the difference between a hero and a superhero? Is it superpowers? Is it, and you're saying they, embodiment, great word, represent that ideal. Is that it, or is there more to the definition of a superhero?
Like we said before, I think that's a great question. And I think it's in your own head of what you look up to and what you have as your ideal. Because it could be, we talked about like Deadpool and Punisher and some of these characters that don't have great ideals but are still looked up to. You know, it's not the same anymore. There's just so many to choose from. Everything's not Captain America and Superman. I mean, we have so many characters that owning the comic book store, the kids always want, you know, what I refer to as like the anti-hero. They want Venom, they want Carnage, they want, you know, Deadpool, which they don't embody the wholesome ideals that we would have thought, you know, back in the day, what they were trying to control. Now it's just kind of all, you know, everything's out there on the table.
But are these children then looking up to them, as you say, as in admiring them, or because they want to emulate or duplicate those behaviors, or are they just entertained by the more anti-heroes in ways because that's become part of our culture? Is
probably,
we
like
have
I said,
stories on
yeah.
the, you know, one of the popular TV shows about a serial killer, you know, Dexter or whatever, you know, and that's not something I'm interested in watching, but it's very popular, so there must be some appeal.
Yeah, it's definitely different, and I think that's the reason it's such a wide range, is because you're trying to hit on whatever it is that people have in their head, that's what they want to read about. Whether they're emulating it, or they're just admiring it, or maybe they're disturbed by it and they just want to learn more about it, who knows, but it's, you know, there's so many out there. It's just, you know, we could talk all day just about each individual character that they've created now. And
but they're not all good guys, is what you're saying.
They're not all good guys, but they're all still, you know, relevant, you know, in the comic book world.
I wonder if that is tied into a larger trend. I've been thinking recently, if you look at Bond movies, there was a time when Bond was this bigger than life. You wanted to be Bond and his life looked awesome. The last 3 movies or so kind of took the gloss off Bond. Like, that is not the kind of life you like, and he's clearly taking a toll what he's doing. I wonder if there's an argument to be made that there's a broader...
He's treating women better, though, after this.
He is, you're right, because it's catching up with him. I wonder if there's an argument to be made there's a broader movement in entertainment, at least, where we're seeing a lot of heroes either becoming anti-heroes or just becoming obviously flawed heroes in ways that we didn't used to see them portrayed. Any thoughts about that?
That's kind of what we were just talking about. You've hit all the other options. I mean, it's getting harder and harder to come up with an original new story. So you're kind of rehashing a lot of different things, but you put your own little twist on them. And I think, you know, that probably is part of it. Either humanize them some more or give them a fault. Get some way to attach yourself to that character. Get the reader to attach to that character, and that's what they're trying to do. And it's every little thing. You know, it's whether it's a war or PTSD, or, you know, anything that you hear about in a daily life, and they try and put that in comic book form too. It's just like anything else. TV shows or all that, they all try and do that.
What do you think? I want to hear your take on that.
It was asked a little earlier that like, are these characters a reflection of society, like at least American society? And I think, you know, you had the nuclear family in the 50s and whatnot, and, you know, as time went on, like, people essentially, not to be too controversial, I think that we as a whole here in America are starting to kind of see through the facade of the American nuclear family and how...
being perfect, you mean?
Yeah.
Being the perfect way of life,
yeah,
and nothing else is as good? Is
yeah,
that what
how
you're
it
saying?
might not necessarily exist, and it is flawed, and it is not exactly as shiny. And, you know, I mean, look at our traditional role models and heroes, your sports stars and, you know, our politicians and whatnot. Look at their behavior that's coming out. And so I think, at least with some of the more altruistic heroes like Superman and, you know, sometimes Batman and whatnot, like, we look to them because we can't necessarily look to those former role models anymore. You know, I think what, you know, back to the anti-hero, what the difference between, like, say, you know, the anti-hero and their arch nemesis is, and what makes them somewhat of a hero, is they do have a couple redeeming qualities in there, and they shine through every once in a while. Whereas the villain, they're just, like, you know, plain and simple a jerk.
Right. Just
know,
a two-dimensional.
to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
And whereas it's harder and harder to see redeeming qualities in, you know, say the sports star that does some pretty crazy things, or the coach that does some, you know, things that I don't really care to mention here, or
Right.
or our clergymen, you know, and the people that we, and, you know, as Americans and our ideals, we entrust with the safety and our best interest, and it's becoming quite evident, especially, like, say, in the city of Flint, you know, it's quite evident that our best interest is not, you know, what they're, you know, what they care about.
Right.
And, you know, it's all entertainment, it's an escape, you know, and so, like, you know, away from the hero thing, something like Dexter, or, you know, let's see, you know, one of the less shiny, like, I mean, because Dexter is a hero to some people, but, like, they're able to do the things that you and I can't do, or get away with, or some things that we may want to play with the idea, but wouldn't bring ourselves, I mean, it's a fantasy, and that's what fantasy is.
An escape, like you said.
So in some ways, it sounds like you're suggesting there's stories where you can create a narrative and a worldview of sorts, where maybe you're pushing the edges, you're looking at someone is doing something evil and they're doing it in the service of good, like Dexter, or at least they're claiming it's in the service of good. And it's a way in which people can kind of wrestle with the morality and ethics of life in the safety of a fictional story. Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
Yeah, and you know, and not so to get away from, like, something like Dexter or something like that. I think inherently as human beings and Americans, like, you know, truth, justice, the American way, we want good things. We want to help our fellow man, and we want to stop injustice. You know, nobody wants to be persecuted for, you know, a lifestyle choice, or you know, many Americans, they're broke, you know, and they're struggling, and that goes back to, you know, the golden age of comics, like during the Depression era, is when I believe that's around the time that superheroes actually came out, was the Depression era. And, you know, we as individuals, we can't do a whole lot about it, you know, and so, you know, people create these stories and these characters that can do something about it, and, you know, you got your bad guy and you got your good guy, and it simplifies things. And, you know, back to the Western era and stuff like that, you had the bad guy in the black hat and the good guy in the white hat and whatnot, and, like, they can, you know, put resolution on something, and they can stop evil from happening. And I think that's a big reason why, you know, these superheroes are making a big comeback in the degree that they are.
So politics then must play into these roles a lot, if they are the embodiment of these kinds of ideals and things. I mean, we talked about altruism, but it seems like the certain political messages, and that must be part of the, I mean, there's wars going on between Batman and Superman, I'm seeing in the titles of these films and things. So now they're clashing almost with each other. So it must be a reflection of certain ideals that are clashing within our culture. Would you agree with that?
That's a great way to put it. I mean, even the newest Captain America movie was the same thing, where you have, I mean, there wasn't a real bad guy in it. You know, it was heroes against heroes. And it's just different ideals. And I'm looking at it a lot in the social media. I wanted to bring this up just because there's this with the social media the way it is, there's almost, you couldn't do this in the past. You couldn't, have a face-to-face conversation with somebody and get really nasty because there's a,
certain politeness
just
that you have in
politeness
person,
or
yeah.
a fear
Right.
this guy might punch me, but there's
Right.
this veil of invincibility that you have when you're just typing and there's a screen.
And you feel
And
anonymous.
It's created, not to get political, but it's created, to me, such a divide in this country
Yeah.
because you can be so passionate because you're just clicking on you're not having a conversation like this. Like I couldn't get like really mean like talking right now 'cause it's just not. But if I was just if I didn't agree with something you said and then we were typing back and forth with each other, it's a lot easier. And if you didn't know me, it's much easier to be more of the bad guy, I guess you can say at that point. And I think that these divisions, getting back into comic books, that's why we have a lot of this stuff. I mean, we do have a very separated country when it comes to politics for the most part. And now we have Superman and Batman, fighting. We have Captain America and Iron Man fighting, and then people are picking sides based on that. Those are things you just wouldn't have saw in the past. I mean, like you said, everybody had the black hat and the white hat, and it was really, you knew everything had a defined role. And now it's much different, and it's totally, portrayed in the comics that way.
I wonder how much social media also plays into the idea that this line between the black hat and the white hat has become muddied because in the 50s, you didn't have social media and immediate access to news. And so something could happen, and it might be a decade or two before the public found out that the person they thought was heroic was actually quite deeply flawed, and maybe the ends they achieved were good ends, but the means they went about it were terrible. Now, because of our access to news so quickly, it seems like maybe we've just taken away that veil of time, so to speak, and we know right away that everybody we admire has something that's a flaw in them.
Yeah, that's exactly true.
Well, I think it's also that probably in the 50s, maybe I'm wrong about this, that here in America there was more solidarity in the idea of the description of who is an American, what do Americans believe. And I think our culture here is much more diverse. And so when you have greater diversity and you have a lot more different ideas, and we're allowing there to be maybe too much clashing of those ideas instead of respect of those ideas. That's what I'm feeling when you, it's hard to have an opinion, state an opinion, and not have anyone say, well, you're wrong about that. It's like, well, an opinion's an opinion. It's not right or wrong, it's my opinion. And people are, like you said, arguing more and wanting to be heard more and wanting to win the argument more. And it feels like that's coming from, I don't know if that's from the social media aspect and we're just taking it and running with it, being able or having that to be able to do that. So again, so back to the superheroes then, as a reflection of that politically. So we're seeing that they're clashing with each other. Is it really clear? Is it almost black and white which hero represents what ideal? And so that's what's making the story? Again, not a watcher or a reader of superhero comics and such, but is it very evident? I mean, if I go watch one today, will I walk out going, oh, well, that was obviously this. No.
It won't be black and white. I think a lot of it's in that muddled area you were just talking about. It's getting farther and farther away from black and white anymore. Which is maybe a good thing all in all. I mean, really to have different opinions or be able to be swayed a different way, thinking one way and then realizing that you made a mistake. I think everything's kind of in that gray area right now. They don't have too many characters. I mean, not even Superman or Captain America. A lot of these characters have different differing opinions of other people, and it seems to take away from their wholesomeness. In fact, they're just flawed like the rest of us. So.
Seems like then the viewer, reader isn't getting the resolution that you were talking about. That sense of resolution, that sense, you were talking about that earlier. Do you think that that's kind of missing now, and that's contributing to this feeling of unrest?
I would say it is missing a little bit, but me personally, that excites me because it promotes thought. It presents an idea. It says, here's our opinion, here's the idea that we propose, and the bad guy doesn't die at the end. you know, and the good guy didn't get the girl, or the good guy might have died, you know, in the process. And you're left with the burden, if you will, or the responsibility to form your own opinion on whatever subject matter they're dealing with, and to go from there with it. And you know, to go from there, and you know, it gives you your own power, essentially. And I think the whole resolution and the black and white and all that, as far as like, you know, we're talking about pop culture and American culture, you know, as far as like our cinema goes, it's always, you know, American cinema has always been, you know, the hero, whether it be John McClane in The Tower, you know, or, you know, now Superman or whatever, he fights the bad guy, he goes through all the low-level bosses and stuff like that, and then you get the big climactic battle, and he ties a bow on it by killing the bad guy.
Wins the day.
Yeah, and it, you know, and I think we've become desensitized as a culture of like, it's okay that, you know, the hero just killed him and threw him off a high-story building because he was really mean and he's a bad guy, you know, and like, you know, there's a song, I can't remember the artist and whatnot, but like, here in America, we like our bad guys dead, you know, and you know, it's not that black and white, because who is right and who is wrong, you know. I attended a film yesterday, and I was able to see that transpiring right in front of my face, you know. This group feels one way and this group feels one way, and they both believe in their hearts, truly in their soul, that they are right. And so who really is right, and how many wars and how many people have died over that, you know, over that question of I'm right, or that statement, I'm right, you're wrong.
If they're successful in demonizing the other and labeling them as other, that helps
rules.
And I think the recent Daredevil series captured that tension of what to do with bad guys. I mean, here you've got Daredevil, who's committed not to killing them, and the Punisher, who very much is. And at least by the end of season 2, there's a number of pretty fascinating conversations between the two of them. It sounds like they're just exploring what is a current tension in our culture, perhaps.
Yeah,
maybe even tying it into terrorism more directly than we might think.
Exactly, yeah, very much so. And it gives you different takes.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to, because if you were going to continue on that, I would let you, but it reminded me of, because Batman's considered very dark by a lot of people, and there's it's the Under the Red Hood cartoon in the series, I don't know if you read any of that, but the Joker killed Robin as a way to get to Batman, and long story short, they brought Robin back to life. They do that in comics quite a bit. And he turned out to be more of, when he came back, more of a vigilante type. And he went and got the Joker, and he wanted to kill him, and he wanted Batman to see that, you know, this is how you deal with bad guys. And he basically said, you know, how could you let this guy live after what he did to me? And Batman's like, the easy thing to do is to kill him. The hard thing to do is to do what's right, you know, and to be that, you know, to live by your ideals. And I just thought that was so really cool, because he's such a dark character, but he still has a moral code, and he always has. I'm definitely more old school when it comes to comic book characters. I really like Daredevil's another one. He always did the right thing. You know, he'd get pushed to his limit, but he would always end up doing the right thing. And it's just, that's what separates those characters, and they get to stay on the non-muddled side usually, which is nice.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, writers like Alan Moore, Frank Miller, Neil Gaiman's, and there's probably other names you could throw out there, kind of turned the genre in some ways toward a darker feel. And The Watchmen, I think, is kind of a marker for kind of taking the gloss off of the superhero, or I guess making sure the hats aren't so clearly black or white hats that people wear. It sounds like you're saying you don't like that move in the comics. I'm just kind of curious, what do you think of the shift from kind of this golden age idealism to where we are now? Do you feel like that's a healthy reflection about the reality of life, or do you feel like it kind of robs the readers of some sense of an idealism or an easier sense of viewing the world? Did that question make sense?
It does. I guess it just depends on what you're trying to get out of the comic books. Me personally, I do like the ideal part of it. But but that's not necessarily what everybody wants. You know, those writers opened up a whole new book. I mean, Image Comics is a creator-owned. You bring it to this publisher, and you get to basically own the rights to these characters. And it's not all superheroes. A lot of it's just everyday stuff. A lot of these have been turned into TV shows. Walking Dead is a huge example of a creator-owned just idea between friends that turns into this huge hit. Outcast, which is on Cinemax right now, another huge hit. There's a whole bunch of them, and they're getting away from the superhero because it's all been done. I mean, we talked about that before too. It's already been done. It's all been rehashed. So they got to take these new original ideas and try and get different readership in that, like, you know, could be you. Like, oh, I don't want to know about superheroes. They've been around so long. I don't know how I'm going to ever know everything about Batman. Well, now you've got this brand new world that's out there that you can start reading a comic book or a graphic novel. And that all started with the authors that you just said. I mean, they started out, most of them, writing superheroes, and then they took it to that next level, and they did extremely well. So I think that opened up the book to all these other writers and artists that can do basically whatever they want. There's no more comic code. You know, we don't have to worry about what we write about anymore. We don't have to worry about the visual aspect of it. We don't have to worry about selling to kids anymore. You know, they just don't. You know, the target audience is 18 to 70. You know, so it's just definitely different. Sorry if I took the.
No, it's quite all right. On that topic, I mean, we all stopped believing in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy at some point, you know.
What? Come on.
So you still get a quarter under
Burst my bubble.
No, the Easter Bunny's real. It is Australian, apparently. But it's a cute movie. Oh, where was it going?
Did you lose your train of thought? Sorry. My fault.
Not to beat a dead horse with what I'm saying, but over time, we became disillusioned with a lot of ideals in our society, I think, and the creative outlet that a lot of these people used, they wrote, they had their own take on Batman. And they had their own take on Superman and these various other characters and whatnot. And I personally think it's a good thing because who wants to take for example the new Zack Snyder film. There's a lot of criticism of it because these characters weren't portrayed in the classical sense.
Right.
I appreciate that because I don't like repetition. I don't like manufactured, churned out things, especially when it comes to art and it comes to characters that are beloved to me. And I appreciate what they do. But I also do appreciate, and I think there is a need for, like Mr. Akerly is saying, I think there is a need in the society for the classic Captain America and the classic Superman, because if they don't do that, if there's not a role model that's capable of doing that, like what's going to happen to us? What's going to happen to us as a society? Because obviously, like now, today more than ever in this country, we need solidarity. We need to come together. We need to be able to put aside our political opinions and start working on like some real issues. You know what I mean? Like the safety and the longevity of our race on this planet and sustainability and stuff.
But is that a congressman? I don't see a superhero who's a congressman writing bills.
How do we? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say it makes me think of Ultron saying the first thing he's going to do is rob people of hope. And I wonder if that's what we're talking about when we talk about this idealism that was present in comics and our heroes, is that there's a sense that there's hope, that there is someone there that will save the day. Somebody's out there who's worthy of your admiration. And the danger of the new trend is that you take that away from people. So to go back to what you were saying, Josh Whedon once said, all worthy work is open to interpretations the author did not intend. Art isn't your pet, it's your kid. It grows up and talks back to you. So I wanted to ask both of you, what do you think of the retelling of the stories in some ways? And you've kind of touched on this, but do you have a sense that the characters should be canonical? They are who they are. If you want to tell a different story, create a new character, or are you good with letting them grow up and talking back? Sounds like you don't mind them growing up and talking back. So maybe I'll throw this over to Mike. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Talking about the Zack Snyder Superman, having him snapped Zod's neck at the end. I mean, that's just 100% not Superman. A lot of people had a hard time with that.
Spoiler alert, it sounds like.
I think it's not long enough. I was
Something
hoping.
just happened. Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry, spoiler. That offended a lot of people. But then there are also a lot of people who said, yay, I don't have to watch Christopher Reeves as Superman. I get to watch my own version of Superman. You know, what does that say about our society? I don't know. I didn't like it personally. I understood his approach. I understood that he wanted, you know, the role Kevin Costner played as his father was more flawed.
Give me 2 sentences of what happened and why was a neck broken.
What are we talking about? For those of us who are clueless.
He had Zod pinned down, which is basically another Kryptonian that, you know, has basically his powers, and he was basically trying to eliminate the human race and create a new Krypton on our planet. And he was going to kill people with his vision. They have heat visions. And he was going to kill people, and
So he was a bad guy.
the only way he could stop him is to kill him. And he said that the only way you're going to have to.
So had
stop me is
Superman
kill
never
me.
killed people or
Superman
anyone
doesn't
before?
kill people.
Oh, that's why. Okay, Superman
No.
saves kittens out of trees. And
He does everything, but he finds a way. He always
Other
finds a way. You know,
people
that's
kill people,
that's
but-
another, you know, good
Okay.
part about comics back in the day is, you know,
Interesting.
you always found a way. There was
Right.
always a better way to do something.
Then
And now that's, you know, there's a little more shortcuts involved, and but once again, this is just totally an opinion. It's not
Right,
anything. There's a lot of people who love that movie. There's a lot of people who can't wait to see what Zack does with the Justice League and the Wonder Woman character. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean,
Well, it is interesting the backlash to that, like you're saying, that
But they
that
want that.
character doesn't do that, you know, that crowd versus the as a
it
bad
get-
guy.
it
We
gets
kill
dialed.
bad guys. You said we kill bad guys here in America. You said that earlier,
Well,
right? So then why is there backlash when Superman does it? That's fascinating in and of itself.
Well, he's moving from someone who is kind of a duty-based ethicist, for lack of a better term, to a consequentialist. Superman never used the ends to justify the means, correct? And Snyder has him do that, I believe.
yeah. So yeah, it takes it to that next. You know, it is a change in the character, but I mean, unless you want to watch Christopher Reeve Superman your whole life, or George Reeve Superman for that matter, I mean, you're going to have the character evolve, and you know, that's like we talked. That's just a little darker these days.
Can I shift this to
People who are
villains for a
outraged were
minute?
disappointed. That's the word. They were
Yeah.
disappointed. Yeah.
I'm going to shift just because I have my eye on the clock, and I've got a lot of questions I want to ask you. So let's talk villains for a minute. I was reading an article that claimed that Heath Ledger's Joker showed that people don't need superpowers to be a threat. And I'm sure he's not the first one, but at least for a movie-going audience, he was one who did not have superpowers, right? He was just a person who snapped. I think you could argue the villain in the Civil War movie, the guy, the ultimate villain at the end, not the conflict within the groups, was just a guy. On the other hand, in Age of Ultron, the villain is artificial intelligence. In Batman Superman, it's a monster of science and alien DNA, right? So how good do you think the genre is at identifying cultural fears? I mean, I'm kind of making an assumption that over time, the nature of a villain shifts in a way that reflects where people are, or what people are highlighting as the source of what we really ought to be afraid of. And so just thinking of the last couple movies, and you guys can help me out here, we've got artificial intelligence, we've got just people who snap, and frankly, with the situation in Orlando this last week, that seems like a very real fear. What do you think of how villains in comics are reflecting more of a national sense of the things that we ought to be afraid of? I know that's a pretty open-ended question.
Ought to be or are.
Or either one.
Yeah.
To me, they're exactly like the heroes, whereas they have so many different reasons they are what they are. I mean, everything, like you were just saying. I mean, there's so many reasons, you know, whether their family was killed, whether, I mean, if you look at the Daredevil series with the Kingpin, he's not really you know, especially in that series, he's not any kind of superhuman guy. He just has a lot of power, and he decided to use that corruptly. It just, yeah, I mean, I don't know even how to answer that. There's so, it's literally everything you can think of for a hero and how they became a hero has done the same thing as a villain, and they just went the other way instead of going towards the ideal. So, I mean, so any superhero that you've ever thought about, you know, there's a anti-version of him out there, basically.
Lex Luthor, one of the first ones. Lex Luthor did not have superpowers. He had power. He was a rich guy and all that stuff, and just a normal somewhat of a normal human being, but he was deranged and power hungry and all that stuff. And
He was whose villain?
That's Superman's arch nemesis, the bald guy.
Okay.
And over the years, they've done things with that character to make him more of a realistically formidable, foe for Batman and whatnot. But ultimately, he does the things A, he's afraid of him, and B, he's jealous of him, because he's power hungry and Superman has real power, and I like what Mike touched on, how Superman never crossed that line. There's always a way. There's always a way to do the right thing, and I think that's the beauty of comics and whatnot. But as far as the villain, a good example of what you're touching on, Anthony, is the X-Men and the dynamic between Professor X and Magneto. And I've talked with people about this before, but I never thought about it until I saw a speech from one of the former Marvel writers and whatnot. But he turned me on to the fact that the X-Men is actually, the time it came out in the 60s or early 70s and whatnot. 60s, yeah, and it's an allegory about the civil rights movement. You have Professor Xavier, who is about peace and understanding and bridging those ties. Who does that relate to? Martin Luther King. And then you have Magneto, who their motivations are to help their people. Right. They're trying to help mutant kind. But Magneto is a metaphor for Malcolm X, who was more militant about things and was ready for a revolution and go to war, and that's what Magneto does. So.
Interesting. Okay, broad question for you: Marvel or DC?
I'd say which era, I guess, but me personally, for some reason, and I've thought about it over and over, and I guess it's because one of my favorite superheroes was Spider-Man, and as with a lot of people, because he is an everyday, he's an everyday kid, and he's always dealt with, juggling school, relationships, job, all that stuff, and he's a very relatable character and whatnot, and then a lot of the other Marvel characters and stuff, but I've heard both sides of the argument and stuff like that DC is more based in reality, Marvel's more based in reality. I don't know, I'd say that Marvel has more of a sci-fi feel. A lot of characters are they get their powers from radiation, gamma radiation, and other scientific things, or mutants. Their DNA changed and whatnot. Whereas, DC is a little more mystical and a lot more. Well, not a lot more, but aliens and stuff like that. And it's
maybe more mythological too.
Yeah, you could say that.
Could be.
A lot of it is when you're young. I think you love all the Marvel characters. It's much easier to relate, and I think Stan Lee always said that he tried to make more relatable characters as much as he could for the kids. Whereas DC kind of was doing what they wanted. They had pretty powerful characters. They had a pretty good mythology going at their own level, and they really didn't care about what Marvel was doing. So Marvel, had to kind of go their other direction. When I was a kid, it was totally Marvel. I mean, everything was Marvel. But now, as I get older, I appreciate a lot of the DC history, and so I'm never going to say one or the other. I mean, I love them both. But
so we have to have a superhero or hero that we relate to in some way to be able to kind of understand where they're coming from. They can't be so foreign. But would you say that across the board, part of the definition of a superhero is they're representative, or they're champions? That's more the word I want. They're champions of the disenfranchised, in my mind, that's kind of more, they're protectors of the realm. The kinds of things that they're doing. Is that an accurate
Yeah.
description of
Yeah.
what's so appealing about them? They're fighting for us.
You would think so, but then you have the Deadpool movie come out and make just an absurd amount of money, and it had no. It was a very good movie. I loved it, but it had
was he
no.
called a superhero? I don't know anything about him or the movie, but
People look up to him. I mean, like we said, what is a definition of a superhero? There's people that look up to Deadpool. He has no real redeeming quality. I think they tried to make him, somewhat, I don't want to say relatable, but
Entertaining. At least.
it was entertainment.
But people truly admired this person,
sure.
and you're saying he had no
Unbelievable
redeeming.
amount of kids
He must
that
have
come
had some
in.
redeeming quality that they.
He looks cool. Yeah.
He looks cool, and I think
It's kind of a sad state of society if that's the. I want to believe you're missing something. Sorry.
No, it's all right. I think if you tear away the glitz and the glam and the mutants and the the superpowers and whatnot, at its heart, and if you look at the date it was released, Deadpool was released on Valentine's Day, because at its heart, Deadpool was a love story. A brief synopsis is he was not really that great of a guy, but he did still have little redeeming qualities with something that happens at the beginning of the movie, and he meets the girl. He meets the girl of his dreams, and you'd have to see the movie to see how that plays out. But it's pretty fun. And then
Does he have a superpower? Is that what makes him a superhero?
he is given superpowers
Okay.
at some point, but and it's a result of boy meets girl, falls in love, they're going to get married, and then as soon as you find out that they're going to get married, he falls flat on his face, and it turns out that he has terminal cancer and he's going to die like really soon or like really quickly, and so he puts himself into this he essentially sells his soul to the devil to be with the woman he loves. And it backfires on him, and the rest of the movie is a personal vendetta against the person that wronged him, but ultimately he just wants to get back to the woman he loves.
So this doesn't sound at all to me like a superhero story, but maybe I'm like you, the traditional idea in my mind of what a superhero is.
Exactly.
But
I wouldn't
since the
call it
lines
that, but
become more gray, he's fallen somehow close to this category?
it's considered a superhero movie. I mean, most people would, in at least that genre, yeah. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
We've got
So,
about 2
one more
or 3
question,
minutes
yeah.
left, so here's my last question for both of you. Do you recommend a particular comic book series or movie for, let's say, someone like Kim, theoretically, who doesn't know much about the genre, but it would be a good introduction? Is there a particular one that stands out to you?
Let me do it. I would say go to the Image line, and those are all creator owned, so Marvel and DC doesn't have the rights to this. They don't control any of it, and a lot of the things that makes that good and on our end is they create a cheaper way to get into those characters, and there's no huge universe that you have to know about before that. But yeah, I mean, come in the store and pick up the Saga trade. It's called Saga. Brian K. Vaughan writes it. Brian K. Vaughan is one of the best writers ever, and it's a very love story, space, Dungeons and Dragons. You throw everything together, and it's just this perfect book, and it's drawn by one of the best artists out there, and she's female. It's just really, really good, and you should check it out.
You agree?
I haven't had the privilege of reading it, but what I was going to say is the best way to find, the right fit for you is to find your local comic book nerd and have a conversation with them, because there, as Mr. Akerly is saying, there's so much out there that appeals to so many different people because of the evolution of comics and whatnot, that it's hard to just, our viewing public here, who knows who's watching and what their interests and likes and wants and their fantasies are. So I suggest finding a comic book person and having a conversation with them, and that way they can direct you in the right direction. And if you can't find a comic book nerd, go see Mike at Top Comics, and they will they
You
will
qualify
be
as a
able to
comic
help you.
nerd, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Fair enough.
You'll walk out of there with something, I guarantee.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew, for coming and being on the show. Thank you, Mike, for
No problem.
joining us and the great
Thanks for choosing the topic.
conversation about the return of the superhero in popular culture. And thank you for watching. You can catch us in future shows, Cablecast on the Up North TV channel 189, or you can catch us on YouTube on our director's channel, Michael Tom's TV. Thanks for watching.